You are listening to Within Tolerance, a podcast for machinists by machinists. I'm your host, Dylan Jackson of Proteum Machining, and this week I am very happy to welcome Graham Francis. Welcome, Graham.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. So, for those who don't know who you are and what you do, give us all the details.
All right. Well, I'm going to start off at the beginning. We were episode 24. My name is Graham Francis. I'm with Lights Out Manufacturing. A little distinguished on the name, but we were Rapid Design Solutions, and we are just in the process of changing our name. Rapid Design Solutions will slowly go away. There's a lot of use of the word rapid in the automation industry, so this will help distinguish us a little better. And
Awesome.
To start from the beginning, Troy covered kind of the beginning of the company's history. I'll go into my history, how I got involved, and then kind of pick up where Troy left off and give people the updates for where we are today.
Well, yeah, even before we go into your history, what does Lights Out do? I mean, I think that I probably have a fair portion of the audience who have not listened all the way back to episode 24, so they might not know what Rapid Design Solutions is or Lights Out. So what do you guys do? What are you known for? All of that.
Yeah, certainly. We turn machine shops into automation pros. So we are Universal Robots' top integrator for machine tending. And
Oh, wow.
that is what we focus on.
Killer. All right. Well, then, yeah, let's get into how you got into manufacturing and how you got to where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. When I was 4 years old, I looked at my mother, who rides horses for a living, and my father, who's a fly fishing guide, and said, I want to be an inventor. What do I go to school for? And they were like, I have no idea. Be a mechanical engineer. So I just did that, and I've never looked back. I've absolutely loved it. So I got a Lego Mindstorms kit when I was in about 5th grade, and that just had me absolutely hooked on robotics. And then went to high school and took metals class. And of course, they only went into welding, and I finished all the assignments early and said, hey, what's that machine over there in the corner? And he says, oh, that's a CNC mill. I don't know how it works. Here's the manual. Good luck. And so,
wow, what an opportunity.
Yeah, super lucky. I cut this little piece of foam that I've saved. It's my first CNC part. That was before I even knew what an email was, and wrote my first CAM program and made a part, and then got into, I was a first robotics kid. That is such an awesome program. Only have good things to say about it. That's where I learned manual machining, how to code robots truly, not with the Lego interface. And then after high school, went to Montana State University for mechanical engineering and manufacturing engineering degrees. That's where I bumped into Haas machines and absolutely fell in love. If you ever want an interesting person to bring on the show, Tom Youngst has got to be the best machinist I've ever met after traveling the country. And he is the most humbling human being I've ever met. You meet him and you think, well, this is just a ski bum. There's no way this is the manufacturing guru. But I still attest to think he's the best machining instructor that's ever existed. He actually welded the tram at the top of Big Sky and has worked on a numerous amount of aerospace projects. And he left MSU right after I graduated to be the head of their R&D machine shop at Los Alamos National Labs, and missed Montana too much, came back, and they liked what he did so much, they actually gave him a budget to start his own school for training machinists just so they can have the first pick of his graduates.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, he's a pretty wild guy, and he's been in some Warren Miller films. He's a huge skier. And then, so learned machining in college, and then did a short stint at K2 designing ski equipment in Seattle. I was chasing the skiing dream, always been a skiing nerd, and realized I couldn't live in the big city. So moved back to Montana and got a job at a plastic injection molding facility where I was designing the parts, doing mold design reviews, and then programming the injection molding machines as well as designing the automation. That was an incredibly valuable job because they flew me to China and I did a bunch of work in Juarez, Mexico, installing these automation systems. And getting to see the parts that I designed and the mold all the way through, which was really fun. And then while I was working at that job, I actually was at a school board meeting for my grade school because my mother was on the board and I was being supportive, sitting in the back, kind of a little bored, and look at the guy next to me just being friendly and said, "Hey, what do you do?" And he says, "Oh, I sell Haas machines." And I about jumped off my chair and said, "Really?" And he says, "Yeah, he doesn't usually, you don't bump into people that know what machining is in the wild very often, right?"
Oh yeah. No, I definitely know that feeling of like, oh, we're gonna be best friends then. Obviously, like you're the only person in probably a 10 square mile that knows what a machine is. So
Right, absolutely. And this is in, Gallatin, Gateway, Montana, population 3,000. So and so I said, "Can I take you to breakfast?" And I took him out to breakfast and sat him down and said, "I want your job." And he says, "Well, there's lots of shops you can work at." And I said, "No, I don't want to work at a shop. I want your job." And so I bugged him for about 2 years. And finally he called me up and said, "All right, I'll give you my job." And I didn't know at the time, but he's actually the owner of the HFO for Idaho and Montana.
oh
And
wow.
was dating my fourth grade teacher is the reason he was there.
Oh, so you're both being supportive.
Both being supportive.
Wow. That's crazy. So was that, I think I saw on your LinkedIn, was that King? Is that the HFO?
Yep, King Machine. And they sold here about a year and a half ago to Gossiger.
Oh wow. Okay.
So now they're HFO Boise is what they're called.
Okay.
And I love driving around Montana and Idaho visiting customers. It was, I feel like, a very unique territory talking with all the other machine tool salesmen in the country, because the only other machine tool salesmen that were really driving around Montana were here on a fishing trip and decided to stop by a couple shops, right? And then the people that choose to live there and run machine shops are so interesting, and there's very little support for these machine shops. And of course, there's exceptions. The major metropolitan areas have some very big, well-known aerospace shops that don't need any help. But all these rural guys, you're having dinner with their family, getting to know their finances, and the only way you're selling a machine is if you're going to be the one that rigs it for them and sets it up and teaches them how to use it. So it was not necessarily, a typical sales job where you're just knocking on doors. And I feel like a lot of machine shops in the rest of the country really know what they're doing. They're not saying, "Hey, I don't know what this CNC stuff is." I actually walked into a shop in Billings, Montana one time, and I said, "Hey, I sell CNC machines." And he looked at me and says, "We don't need any of that CNC crap. All we have here is see and do." So it's just
boy.
kind of set the tone.
You're like, oh, I'll see myself out. Thanks.
Yeah. I got,
Oh man.
there's one
That
shop
must have been really gratifying though, like getting that into people's lives. It's not that, very sterile sales environment that I think a lot of us deal with.
Oh, it was absolutely phenomenal. They're such good people. I love this industry.
So then where did you go from there?
Yeah, sure. So working at King, I'm not quite done with that. I think I got such amazing experience and met some super cool people, but most interestingly, got to see how every machine shop runs their business and the different mentalities about whether people try to prioritize spindle uptime or profit per part, or OEMs who really aren't even focused on the machining aspect as much. And while I was there was some customers. One of them actually used to be part of this church, shall we say, that thought the world was going to end in Y2K. And so he had this bunker that he had built that was this huge bunker. And I walked up to what I thought was a small house and thought, oh, this at the very top of this mountain. And thought, okay, small shop, there's a lot of these and no big deal. Went in and you go into the first room and there's two machines, and then you go through a door further into the mountain and there's two more machines, and then you go into the next door and there's two more machines. And he turned this whole bunker into a massive machine shop that really looks tiny on the outside, and sat me down and we had to meditate together before he was going to buy a machine.
Wow. What an interesting experience.
Yeah, it was
Oh
pretty
my
fun.
goodness.
And then there was this other shop called Sheep Shear in Butte, Montana. And Montana used to be the number one exporter of wool in the world. And during that time, of course, they made all the shears for sheep at this time. Of course, that's all moved over to New Zealand, but all the manufacturing for those shears is still based in Butte. And I walked into this shop where they have these old belt-driven machines, flap, 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 running. And I'm going, oh boy, here we go. This is going to be another Billings experience. These guys don't know what they're talking about. And this guy's in overalls. And this is where I truly learned to not judge a book by its cover, because I thought, oh, this is going to be rough. And he walks me around the corner and, he does have a little Haas, mini mill. I thought, okay, we're getting somewhere. And he proceeds to program by hand G-code for complex full 3D profiles. You can picture those shear heads have, those fingers with ridges that require all that profiling. And he was just typing it out like Rain Man. He was so impressive.
Wow.
I've never seen anyone do anything like that today, even.
That's crazy.
And one of the things in order to get machine sales, sometimes you have to, I didn't always have the time to help people with programming, especially if it was a complicated project. And so constantly looking for contract programmers. And I went through about 5 different people before I had just completely given up, because they either don't manage expectations well, or they completely change the budget, or they go way over budget. It was just always a mess, and it made me look bad for even introducing them to the customer. And when I had moved down to Boise and hired 2 of my best friends to take over my area for Montana and North Idaho, and moved down to Boise where the headquarters was to take over Southern Idaho, because I was under the impression there was an opportunity to buy the company at that time, and I certainly wasn't going to run it remotely from Montana. And while I was down there, I'd actually sold 4 robot systems for rapid design solutions to Jason at X2. And
okay.
that's where I bumped into Chris, and was, for the first time ever, had seen someone that had done contract programming effectively, where the customer was happy, he did it on time, and was completely blown away. So a little shameless plug there. Shout out to him. He does a really good job.
So did sales come naturally to you? Because I feel like a lot of people I talk to, especially from an engineering background, that's not the case. They have a small taste of sales, and then they, the first job they can take to get out of that is the first thing they do. So was that something that you kind of knew going into it you'd enjoy, or did you learn on the job, or how'd that all happen?
Yeah, great question. I actually didn't think I was going to necessarily like sales. I didn't know, but I had worked at a ski shop for 7 years selling bikes, skis, rafts, things like that, and wasn't scared of it, even though engineering was my passion, really manufacturing. But I figured if I took this job as a Haas CNC salesman, I would get to meet every manufacturer in Montana and Idaho. And if I didn't like it, I could call up which one I wanted to work for the most and ask for a job.
Smart. Very smart. A built-in backup plan. I like it.
Built-in backup plan, but I actually loved it. It was such a blast. I was way more technical than what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't just someone calling up knowing exactly what the machine they wanted. There were so many people who were just like, I came up with this invention and I want to build this thing. Can you help me do this? I'm not sure what machine I need or how any of this stuff works.
Right.
And so diving into the whole manufacturing plan for them was really the fun part, and what hooked me. So,
okay.
Yeah. And then I moved down to Boise, and I worked there for, I guess it was about a year, 2 years. And then Gossamer ended up buying King, and I was again stuck in the city with a job going, this isn't really what I wanted to do long term. I thought there was an opportunity there, and Gossamer was an awesome company to work for. They're just an amazing crew. I just had bigger plans. I wanted to get into an ownership position and do something where I felt like I was really going to change manufacturing. And I this is kind of where I put my plan into effect. I was like, okay, who would I work for now that I've met all these people?
There you go. Yep.
And so I called up Troy, and I'd been selling his systems now for about 2 years, and said, hey, I want to buy part of your company. He says, I'm glad you called. Let's do it.
Wow. That's perfect. So it was the right time for both of you, really.
Yep. It certainly was. It worked out well. He's really likes to focus on research and development, not sales. And although my heart is still in, design and manufacturing, especially with this job, the sales guy just develops all of the solution for the customer as to what the automation process is going to look like.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like you're much more a sales engineer than you are a salesman, like
Right.
traditional, for sure. And I thought I heard in the background a compressor, so you must have access to some machinery still.
Yep, absolutely. We have a robot running parts down there right now.
Awesome. So how long ago was this when you started the partnership?
That was right about a year ago.
Oh, wow.
Actually.
Okay.
Yeah, almost to I think it was last week sometime was a year mark. So
Okay. Well, before we get into questions, let's kind of talk about, the current, what Rapid Designs has turned into since episode 24, 2.5 years ago. What have you guys developed since then? What's changed? New products, all of that? Because I think you got some really cool stuff that just came out, and I would love to hear more about your product line.
yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna jump into that. I'm actually gonna rewind a little bit first.
Oh, please. Yeah.
So when I was at King, we actually weren't selling any robots at the time, and I had spent 2 years begging the owner to carry universal robots because I thought this was going to be really good for our customers. It was something that could really help them, and there wasn't really anyone doing it in the area. And of course, I had automation knowledge in the past and wanted to bring that with me. So finally talked him into it, and we went from 0 robot sales to, I think we did about 20 the first year, and then the next year we did about 60, which for Idaho and Montana is pretty small areas, pretty big numbers.
Oh, yeah.
And I learned a ton during that time of what it takes to integrate a robot for machine tending. I had used robots for a lot of other applications, but there's a lot of nuances to machine tending that are a nightmare. I don't need to tell anyone that's listening about chips because they have to deal with them every day, but they cause a ton of havoc with automation. And in order to sell robots in Montana, the only way you were going to get that done is if you were going to program it for the customer and set it up as a turnkey solution for them. There was some, really skilled customers that you could walk them through it over the phone and they would run with it. It still took a lot of discussion and, strategy as to how they were going to tackle the problem. And it took them a long time to get up and running. And that's what made me appreciate Troy so much is when I started selling his systems, he would show up and he would be in and out in 3 days, and the customer was thrilled and they had the knowledge they needed to modify the system to meet their needs going forward. And that's why I was just totally blown away. I stopped doing integration or even helping customers from like that moment and just said, you need to call Troy. This is the easy button. Here it is. He's super affordable compared to any other integrators, and he's going to make your life easy. And so that's kind of leads into Rapid Design Solutions and what we specialize in. And now I'll let you go back on that question you asked me. I apologize. I don't remember exactly what it was.
Just what does your current lineup look like? Like, I know that you guys have just added some recent products. You had a product line before alongside, your other offerings. So what does, I guess Lights Out Manufacturing do? And,
Yeah.
What does your product line look like?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, I think I'll just kind of pick up where Troy left off. If somebody wants to go back and listen to the last episode, and
I'll link it in the show notes for sure.
Okay, cool. So the company was based in Monroe, Washington. And at the time we were doing custom integration jobs for a wide variety of applications. Troy touched on the robot he had made to test touch screens as they went out the door. And we had done some stuff for Valve Corporation to calibrate their VR headsets using a robot, but moving a head around and doing some assembly work for them. Installing the robots to do the assembly work for their VR headsets. And then when Troy ran into King Machine, we started selling the stew out of his systems. He started to focus a little bit more on explicitly machine tending. And when I came on board, I said, hey, we need to try and get rid of all the rest of this stuff. Let's just do machine tending. We're super good at it. We know we're good at it. He was not willing to go outside of the Pacific Northwest at that time. And I said, let's take this thing nationwide. Let's rebrand it. This is, of course, I am like the king of crazy ideas and bring enthusiasm to everything. I just love it. And so we're sitting in a hot springs on a dirt biking trip in the armpit of Idaho. And I'm just hear me out. Like, we're going to call it Lights Out Manufacturing, and we're going to have our slogan be, what would you do with the lights out? Or what do you do with the lights out?
I love it. That's amazing.
And so that's exactly what we did. So now we focus exclusively on machine shops. Shouldn't say that. We get sucked into some other projects occasionally that are too good to pass up. But we really have two systems. There is the direct part loading and the pallet loading. And because our history was so focused on doing custom integration fast and affordably, even though our systems online really show these pre-kitted solutions, that was really just me from a sales perspective trying to have something to share with people with specs and information. And every single system we send out the door to this day still has some tweak because every machine shop is different. Every application is different. Everybody wants something that meets their needs. So this is my attempt of what we have on the website as being as packaged as we can get it.
Right. It's semi-custom. It's not fully custom.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we have our Orion series, which are pallet pools, which is field installable on any machine. And it's, I think, unique because it's inexpensive compared to other pallet systems on the market, with the exception of some of the OEM stuff. And you can pull a pallet off a shelf you haven't ran in 2 months, drop it into the pallet rack, and when the robot picks it up, it uses an RFID tag to go, oh, I know this pallet. It's going to tell the machine which program to run. So people who are running batches of parts, or even job shops who have a fixture they made 2 months ago and get the job back, can, as long as the tools are in the machine, drop the pallet in and run. And we have two systems on our website, but now that Universal Robots has come out with a much larger variety of robots, we could create those for all sorts of weights, parts up to 60 pounds, and we could probably reach 60 different pallets if we wanted to. Everybody wants to use a different 0-point clamping system. So we, have done the 96 millimeter stuff for a variety of brands, the single point stuff. And then we have our direct part loading systems, which I've branded Aries and Perseus for now, but the really only difference is like round parts versus square parts. And you can get a system that has both set up from day one. So if you wanted to move it between your mill and your lathe, you could. So that's awesome. Kind of what the overall system situation looks like.
Very cool. So how was that, seeing UR release the 30 and the 20? Because that would kind of shocked me. Like they had always kind of incrementally, like I remember the 16 being a big deal after the 10, and I'm like, oh, maybe their next one might be 20. But to see like a 20 and a 30 come out was a big shock, at least for someone outside of being in that realm.
Yeah, absolutely. It's really exciting for us, not only because of the payload, but because it's actually a whole new generation of robots. Those robots take half as many parts as the E-Series robots. And
oh, really?
Yep. They run a lot faster. They're a lot more sensitive. They actually are working on coming out with some new products that I don't think I can talk about, but maybe it's
cool stuff coming.
Yeah, cool stuff coming. And
okay.
Actually, one of those I can talk about, this antenna in the background, I'm getting ready to do some beta testing on for UR for remote support so that we can log into our customers' robots live and edit their programs for them and see what they've changed and modify them so that we don't have to be on site to help them optimize a program or fix an issue.
That's killer. I'm sure that'll be incredibly helpful for you guys. I mean, I'm sure that a service call is never a fun thing to do, but if you can do it from, where you're sitting right now, it'll be heaps better.
Absolutely. And it's probably a good time to say, like, we've installed a lot of different robots in the past as a company, and we have nothing tying us to using UR. All of the UR robots we've installed up to this point were purchased from UR dealers and then sold to the customer. So we just prefer to use them for a long list of reasons. Anyone could swap a joint on a UR robot in about 20 minutes by watching a video. If you use a traditional industrial robot, you have to hire a tech to fly in from some other state, and it's going to take him 8 hours to do it. And the programming is so stupid simple. The other thing that's weird about the robot market, is particularly collaborative robots, is the stats that you just read on like the specifications page of that is not necessarily what's important for choosing your robot for an application. So a good example of that would be like payload. There's a lot of robots out there that say, oh, we have a 20 kilogram payload. But what they're not telling you is what the payload curve is for that robot. And that's how far away from the end of the robot arm can you hold that 20 kilograms, and can you still run at full speed when you do that? And UR far exceeds everyone's specs when it gets to true application numbers. That's why you'll see a lot of other collaborative robots where, why are they using that giant robot to hold that little part? Well, that's because it can hold 20 kilograms if it's right on the face, but the minute you put a gripper on there and the part's this far out, the payload drops by half and you have to run the speed by half. Should be able to do that.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, and I would imagine that even if speed was not an issue, accuracy out at full reach might become a real big problem if you're, trying to place pallets or parts accurately in a machine.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and that's the other thing is most other robots can't do full payload at full reach, which is just amazing to me that they can even advertise that payload at that point. But
Right. Well, and you guys just recently came out with a new Vice add-on too, right? Because I remember Troy, I can't remember if it was a new product or fairly new. He had his pneumatic adapter when he came on the show last time.
Yeah, certainly. So to get into the Vice actuator, I think I'll tell you a little bit more about our company philosophy as a whole and what we plan to do with this crazy vision of mine. And that is, I think I'm going to rewind even further. So when I was at the plastic injection molding company, I was designing automation for their Juarez facility, but they didn't have any in Montana. And I saw that they had a robot sitting in the corner, which drove me nuts, but I was too busy doing design reviews on molds and designing customers' parts that it wasn't my core job to do automation. That was the plant side. I was in engineering, but it drove me crazy. So I would come in after hours and I wanted to install the robot. So I installed the robot on the machine, and the lowest level operators at the time were just beside themselves. They were just mean mugging me. They were not happy. They were being rude because they thought this robot was going to mean their jobs. We're in rural Montana. All I do is take the parts out of the machine. If you're programming the robot to do that, what am I going to do? And as soon as I got the robot installed, they didn't lose their jobs because people can't find help. They just got better jobs. They started inspecting parts. They started doing quality control, getting set up for the next job. And they were also the same people that were the first ones to come up to me and thank me. My job is so much better. I'm not bored anymore. And so to carry that forward to what we do now, the number one question any machine tool salesperson gets asked in any visit you go on, they always bring up the same question. Do you know anyone that wants a job? And they, won't admit this to most people, it seems like, but because they know you're in every shop, you think you have an in to find them an employee. And Of course, when everyone's asking you that, the answer is, I don't know where to find them. If I could, I'd sell people instead of machines right now.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. No, I know a few machine techs that I've talked to, they're like, I get offered a job every other day. Like every other shop I'm in, they're like, oh, well, you want to come work here instead?
Absolutely. It's wild. And my mission is to just eliminate as much labor in a machine shop as possible, because it's just going to upskill the employees they have to have better jobs. And in order to do that, I think automation needs to take a giant leap in machine shops. I don't think the market really right now is competing at a level like other industries are. And there's some big technological changes that need to happen to be able to actually eliminate that labor. So I have this crazy vision of this machine where you basically just load in a bunch of full bars of different sizes of material and finished parts where every single one's different coming out this other end of the black box. And how do we get there? I know this is possible. And even if the products don't exist, the technology exists for us to put it together. And so we're looking at what are all the steps in the process we need to take to get to this end goal, and which ones make sense to start with first. And the first one is work holding in the machine. Right now, even if you were to have this system, you can't load 25 different parts without a human going and having to adjust the work holding for every single different part in the machine. You have to, even on a standard pneumatic self-centering vise, go over there and adjust the jaws to a different position to move from a 1-inch to a 2-inch stock size, because it only has a 1/4 inch of travel. So we already had this vise actuator for vices, and but it had limited travel as well. So we decided to come out with an infinite rotation vice actuator, which took quite a bit of development, so that now we can program any manual vice to go to 1 inch, 3 inches, 4 inches, back to 1 inch, and nobody has to touch the vise. Now, this is just the first, first operation. But this will be a big step, because for the first time, all robots in the country will be able to load 50 different parts unattended overnight. And I mean, you could do 100, whatever. And so the next step is, okay, how do we pick up all these different parts? And how do we hold them in an in-feed? And
Right.
our in-feed is really well designed around that already. It was, one of the first things that was leading towards that. And we can pick really any size stock up with changing out vacuum cups with the robot automatically. Small vacuum cup for a small part, 3 vacuum cups for a big part. And then you can now put it in the vise. And we are currently working on a way to unload any part from the vise to put the finished part from the first stop into a cart. And we're actually looking at some other people's products for that already exist. Anytime something's out there, we have no interest in competing with somebody else. We want to be original, come out with new products that are going to rock the industry. So, Kurt has those fingers where you can swap the jaws or the fingers of your gripper out. And Shunk has the same thing. There's this interesting company called Finbo Technologies in Europe that actually allows you to move the finger of the gripper so that you can use the same gripper to hold a wide variety of part sizes. That way, while the part's running, the robot could go over and change its finger gripping distance, even though it only has a small amount of stroke in the gripper, so that we can then go pick up any size part, put it in the outfeed cart.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, as I'm sure here in the next couple months, we'll release a video of a 5-axis machine actually running 25 different parts, because that's the last little piece we need to do that first operation.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll focus on the second operation. I'm going to keep that close to my chest, because we have some pretty cool stuff that is going to enable that to happen as well. So to circle back to our pallet pools, I hope to eliminate those from existence. I don't think pallet pools should exist, because they don't eliminate any labor. They allow you to put the labor from the night into the day so you can run overnight. but somebody's still turning wrenches. And it just is wild to me with the technology that exists today that people are still turning wrenches to load parts into fixtures.
Right. So brings us into one of the questions from listeners. Jeff asked, why are people willing to put a $1,600 add-on, or in this case, I think the Robo's, $3,000 or something like that, onto a $700 vise instead of buying something like an air vise for $1,700? So what are the benefits? How do you guys sell that over selling just an air vise or just a shunt vise with one of your systems?
Yeah, certainly. That's an awesome question. So we've actually sold air vices to customers for assembly jobs where rigidity and accuracy is less important. All of our products that we come out with are really out of necessity to make our own parts. How can we completely automate these so we can pay our employees more and hire less of them? Because you can't find them anyway. We can talk about the whole employee thing here in a minute.
Right. Yeah. It'd be one thing about taking somebody's job, but when there's nobody to fill the job, how many jobs are you actually taking?
Exactly. So the reason we came out with the original vice actuator at that price point, that's the one he's talking about, is the accuracy and repeatability of any self-centering vice, be it manual or pneumatic, is not that of a fixed jaw vice. And when we were originally running job shop parts, when Troy came up with this idea for this vice actuator, he was running some really high tolerance aerospace parts that would not work in a self-centering vice because it wouldn't give him the repeatability he needed. So he needed that pneumatic fixed jaw, and it needed to be easily adjustable. So that's really that's it. Rigidity and repeatability. Aluminum body vices do not work for hardened steels very well. I'm not saying you can't make it happen. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff with really low-end equipment, but it's much harder that way. And I think other reason beyond rigidity and quick changeover is people already have their curved vices. They've got a stack of soft jaws on their wall. Rather than have to recut all of those, just automate what you have already.
No, I like that. I think that's a completely fair answer. I mean, why buy another $1,700 vice when you can, add on to what you already have and what you already are comfortable with too?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't hold as well. You got to remake all your jaws. You probably need a base plate to go with that vice, or
right.
You can just And so. And then the robo wrench is a whole other thing.
The robo wrench work? How are you able to dial it in? Like, how do you tell it what size to go to, I guess is the better question.
Yeah, good question. So for starters, the longest travel pneumatic vice in the market right now is about a 1/4 inch of travel. So any parts that have undercuts that you need to put into the soft jaws, you can't even run with another pneumatic vice that exists, whether you're doing it with a robot or not. So if you're using this thing manually for things that have really large dovetails, you just hook it up to a manual air valve and open and close it, and you don't even need to use the robot. It'll be useful for people in that way. And then telling it how to work with the robot takes special UR code, which we work with our customers to program depending on what level of programmability they're looking for their parts. If they're looking to program with a robot, but they just need to run the same part, they don't need all the fancy code to make that happen, then we give them the basic stuff. And if they want truly programmable vice jaw, then we give them the robot code, and we can help them regardless of what robot they're using it with. We sell a lot of our vice actuators to other integrators. That's actually just a whole topic on its own. Troy was so interesting to me because there's a bunch of automation people out there who don't know machining, a bunch of robot integrators in our industry that don't know machining. They know automation. And there's very few machine shops that know automation well. And you can program a UR robot to load a part into a CNC machine in about 20 minutes, right? Your grandmother could do it. But there's a huge difference between doing it once and doing it for 5,000 parts overnight with short cycle times, or doing it over the weekend even for 100 parts. And programming the robot to pick up things like, oh, a chip fell in the vice jaw, rather than go in and just error out, which I'm sure anyone who's tried to program a robot in a machine shop on their own has had this happen to them. They come in the morning and go, oh, I ran 2 parts and then it stopped. And that's really the biggest difference between our systems and people trying to do it themselves, is we put a ton of fail safes to where the robot can actually make its own decisions. So it goes in, it tries to load the part. It can't go to position. So rather than freak out, it goes out, it blows off the vice jaws with the air nozzle. It'll try to load it again. It'll do that 3 times. If that doesn't work, it will then put that part down, set it aside, go grab a different part. Let's try to load this one. If that doesn't work, well, maybe a tool broke and there's something wrong with your jaws. Or if it's a really tight tolerance fit into the fixturing, maybe you need to move that part around a little bit. And that's the biggest advantage of UR robots, is they're so sensitive. You can't use industrial robots to feel and kind of go, oh, what happens if I go over here? It's kind of like a blind person almost feeling around. And you can use that for a lot of different things. And then the other things would be like, what happens if somebody loads something into the in-feed crooked? Well, it's not going to go in the vice jaw. But what if the robot can recognize that it's crooked, readjust, and load it anyway? So we have an endless list of things that we've built into our robot programs over the years that we not only just provide to the customer with our systems, but we try to teach every customer everything we know when we leave, because those are the most successful installs. And our systems are unique from all the other systems, because either the other systems on the market are, here's a robot with a vice, good luck with the programming. Or here is a full turnkey system with our own beautiful HMI that I will say is super easy. You can press like 3 buttons and they will load a part for you, and they will do it really well. But then the shop goes, well, what if I want to flip this part over? Or what if I want to flip it over twice, and on the 3rd time I want to put it in a 4th axis? And actually, this is an aerospace part where if I don't wash off the coolant right away, it's going to get stained. So they can change our systems to do whatever they want, and they're modular, and they can add to them in the future. So if they want to move it to a different machine or swap out the gripper, they don't have to call us to change the programming, because we've trained them on how all of that works. And when new products come out in the market, they can just add it to their system. Their system doesn't get, obsolete.
That's super cool. That's really, really cool. On the RoboRent specifically, how are you controlling that? Like the distance and stuff? Does it zero itself out on full closed jaws and then know from there? Like, is it torque sensing, I guess? Or, how much can you share about that?
Yeah, I can share it all. So we control the torque based on the input pressure of air to each side. So there's one line for open, one line for close. And then if people want to change the pressure, we can just, put a pressure switch that's electronically controlled by the robot to vary that for each part. And then to actually program the location on the part that actually rotates the lead screw of the vise, there's 5 magnets on the inside that are read by a proximity switch on the outside. So for one full revolution, you have 5 indicators, and you would zero the vise all the way home, and then you would start counting those pulses as you open the vise that you know the position.
Oh, very cool. Okay. That's great. Let's see. Chris had also sent in a question, and I have a feeling there's a story behind this. He said, how long did it take for you to grow your sweet beard once you shaved it off after landing a huge deal with King? So what is going on there? Tell me about the huge deal and why you shaved your beard off.
Well, there was no FASTM systems in Idaho and Montana. And there's a company in Boise who was very much had the need for one. And we were selling Kitamura as well, lots of other lines on top of Haas. And I was just fighting tooth and nail for this order. I knew I had the best system. I just had to convince them of it. And that's always why I did so well in sales is if I didn't have what was best for the customer, I would just walk away and I would tell them that because they would remember that and they would come back. But this time I knew this is just a primo product line. I've got a FASTM system with a Kitamura. No one can touch me. And so, but these super awesome customer, really great guys. They not only are super technical, but they also really know how to give me shit. And so I had gotten invited to a poker game that they have at one of their houses every so often. And this is right before they were, about to make a decision on these different systems they were looking at. And they said, you know what? I just won the poker game. Don't ever win a poker game with a customer. That's just a bad idea. And even worse, like I don't know poker. I think that was like the second time I'd played.
Oh no.
I was just blind dumb luck, right?
You're like, oh, straight flush. Is that good? Did I win?
Exactly. And so they looked at me just kind of half jokingly and said, all right, we'll buy this, $1 million system from you if you shave off your mustache.
Oh no.
I was just like, I've had this mustache for a long time. I've done it once before and people don't even recognize me. I look like an entirely different person. But I had to say yes. I said, all right, let's do it. And I shaved off my mustache and walked in there and they immediately said, we are so sorry.
Oh no.
So bad.
That's the worst. Oh, so how long did it take to grow back?
To get to this length, it takes about 3 months.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure the sweetness of victory hopefully held out for at least 3 months then.
Yep.
Oh,
it
boy.
certainly was worth it. It was great. That was a fun time.
One thing I also wanted to touch on, totally off that topic, but I wanted to just dive into automation in general. I think that, many people who listen to this podcast are thinking about automation before we start looking into robot systems, things like that. What are the things that you recommend to customers they should get dialed beforehand? Because, like you said, chips, obviously an issue. Every single person I've ever talked to about automation has said that chips have bit them in the ass numerous times. So besides chips, what are other things that you see that, we can start working on now as shops that, are gremlins that pop up when you start automating things?
Awesome question. How much time do you have?
Bring it on.
Okay, cool. So for starters, obviously there's chips. Let's just touch on like low-hanging fruit way to control chips. I want to do a huge shout out to Swarf Unlimited. They're doing God's work with their systems. They totally work and they don't make them for all machines yet, but that's a huge step in the right direction. So being able to put volume to chips, whether it's for, especially with small tools, if you can get a high pressure pump. I mean, people have been selling these forever, right? To break chips with small tools, but it really works. Customers a lot of times are hesitant to believe it. And understandably, it's an expensive system to bite off to buy a high pressure coolant system to put on your machine. If you can't get chips to break, that would be especially helpful for, turning centers where chips could be a nightmare. And then everyone knows about the chip fans, of course. Zebek brushes, for whatever reason, I find a lot of shops don't know about. But those are great. Deburr your parts. Bring your parts out of your machine completely deburred, or you're going to have a bad time.
Oh, yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's that, of course, T-slot covers. And it's a lot of these things people have heard of, but they don't know how imperative it is to implement them all. Because automation, the difference between reliability and running two parts and stopping and not getting your overnight run is all these little tiny things. And this is not to touch on chips, but my favorite example is people love to buy these extruded aluminum robot stands because that's what's for sale on the market. We didn't want to get into the robot stand business, but nothing we could find would work. And those robot stands work great for, if you're doing like a bread assembly line, moving packages of bread onto pallets. You don't really need that accuracy, but when a big robot is moving a metal part, it needs to be perfectly accurate into a vise and that thing wiggles just a little bit. You don't know why it stopped. You'll chase yourself for months trying to figure out why it's not working. So chips would be one. Work holding is an interesting topic because obviously you can't just jump. Well, some shops can, but there's a lot of shops who can't justify necessarily going the full automation route, and they have to go high density first. The only caveat with that is it's really hard. Well, it's not hard, but it's money that's already been spent. You can't put towards your automation system when you go high density. So if you've got pallets full of parts and you've invested in all this fixturing and then you start to look at automation, we run into that a lot. Or people go, oh, but I have all these pallets that load all these parts. Can we load the pallet? And I say, yeah, we can. Absolutely. However, you're still going to pay someone to load the pallet. And we can. So if people can focus on one part workflow, one important note is people always want to load like 2 parts at once. And the tricky part about that is unless you start creating this end of arm tooling for the robot that has a bunch of different grippers, then which start to get in the way, and you really only want 2, rarely sometimes 3 grippers depending on an application. And that means in order to load more than one part, you're going back out of the machine to pick up another part. And because the doors have to, or the machine is just sitting there waiting, well, the robot's going to pick up that next part. It would actually be faster if the doors closed and it started to run. So loading more than one part is something that comes up a lot, but I'm already getting off tangent here because you asked before the robot. So we've got chips. We talked about a couple devices there. And then we have tool life management. Most machines have tool life management on their control. It's really easy to implement. You just replace all your tool numbers with the group numbers and then put all the tools that are redundant tooling into that group, and the control does it for you. And you can start to track all that tool data, even if it's not something that would necessarily be of an advantage to a shop right now. Collecting that tool data for, oh, this one breaks every time the spindle torque hits X. Now you know that and you have that for life. So when you go to automate parts, even though it's a different part, this end mill I always use for my aluminum parts always breaks at this torque. That's invaluable. And especially because it's different for how people program the machine they have, the tool holding they have that's specific to them, those numbers. So advanced tool life management, I cannot preach enough about. And then you can do cheap part or probing in your machine, tool breakage detection. So I know probing is becoming super widely popular. Everybody has probing, but there are some holdouts out there. And or people with old machines who just can't get probing on them. I tell you what, you can go on McMaster-Carr, get yourself a limit switch, and you can put it into your M codes in your control and just feed back, hey, did my tool break? Does it tell you the length? No, but at least you know whether it's going to wipe out all the rest of them.
Right. Yeah. It's like those little whisker touch ones that some like 5-axis machines have, or Swiss machines, to check if tools are just still there. Like, is it there or is it not? That's all I need to know.
Yep, exactly. So that's an easy one. Other things to prepare for automation ahead of time. Work holding is always something you can make the jump to. Even though you're not getting automation, get automated vices, for example. And this kind of gets into the whole, well, I'm not going to do automation for a while and I want to do high density work holding conversation. But if you could try to plan for that ahead of time, like using a bunch of, Mitico pallet changers are awesome because you could put pneumatic vices on a Mitico pallet changer, and they would automatically swap out. You get high density. The operator has all the time to load. Same theory as, a manual pallet changer. But now you also have a system you can add a robot to. And that is the exception for a robot and high density, is you have a pallet changer, machine's running, so I have all the time in the world for the robot to go and get more parts. So the actually most efficient automation system of all is a pallet changer mixed with a robot. And that's something you can
Okay.
do pre-automation.
And then are you guys, I assume you've done systems like that. Are you using things like VecTech then to automate the clamping for the robot? Like the robot loads 50 parts and then a pneumatic switch, flips all those and holds all the parts or something like that?
We typically don't do that because all of our customers are focused on high mix, low volume. So right now, we have the only system that you can move from one machine to another machine and be running a different part that you've never run before in about 30 minutes. And of course, there's a lot of caveats with that, right? If we're switching from a mill to a lathe, I'm going to increase in time because we got to swap out our infeed and gripper. But if you're running two parts you've ran before, it's really fast to switch between the two. And so I don't get to work with the VecTech stuff very often unless we're doing a really high volume job, but that's really not what we specialize in because there is already those traditional integrators that are helping out the Fords and the GMs of the world that are doing these high volume projects. Those are the people using VecTech. All our
Right.
stuff
Honestly,
is...
I was asking selfishly because I've always seen it and it's always looked so cool, but I've never spoken to anyone who's used it. And so like I really want to know more about it, but have no avenues for that. So
Yeah, absolutely. And that's probably why you hear disappointment in my voice because I would love to play with it as well.
yeah, it just seems like such a cool option out there because, as someone who has tightened hundreds of Mighty Bytes before, it's not fun at all. And like turning one knob to do all of that seems awesome.
Absolutely. I have a really interesting invention idea that I'm never going to get to. So I'm going to put it out there. I hope someone steals it and runs with it, especially people that know the injection mold world has these what are called mud bases. And they're essentially a base for an injection mold that allow you to quick change the cavity and core themselves that basically just slide into the machine so they don't have to be bolted to the machine. And so you can buy all these common components for these common sizes from a variety of mold component suppliers. And basically what you get with these is two plates with some die springs that are very precise with pins for the plates to slide on. And you could take one of these and turn it into a pneumatic cylinder. And then all you would have to do is swap out the plate that all your Mighty Byte clamps screw into. And you could always use the same base for all your different fixtures that would operate all your Mighty Bytes. So the next time you make a Mighty Byte fixture that you don't want to operate the bolts on, all you would have to do is swap out the top plate, which you're making for all of your fixtures anyway. And rather than have the bolts just be screwed into a plate that doesn't move, it's operated pneumatically to all go up and down. I think that would be a really slick product that would be killer for us, something that's not difficult to make and, something that's a cylinder that is 12 inches square, has a lot of force. So it would be really easy to operate a bunch of clamps.
I love it. That's super cool. Well, that brings me on to shop news and new things. You've shared some new products and what's going on, but anything else new or exciting going on in your life or Lights Out? What's going on with you guys?
Yeah, certainly. Exciting things. I could kind of talk about I'm going to talk about employee issues, right? Just because we're an automation company does not mean we are immune from employee problems.
I'd love to hear it. Yeah.
So we treat our employees all super well. They can come and go whenever they want, as long as they're getting stuff done. Everybody's a super hard worker because we want them to come to work. We don't want them to feel like they have to come to work. And but it doesn't matter how much you pay people, right? We had an employee that we had trained from 18 to 21. Great guy. And he was a full-blown machinist when he left here. He could set up machines, he could set up robots, he could do installs. He was highly motivated, super smart. But he'd moved to Idaho with us, and he was a younger guy. They were just about to have their first kid, and they missed their family and friends, and they moved back to Washington. So here we have this guy that is 21, no other work experience, that we're paying 75 grand a year to have complete flexibility, and you lose him anyway. He took a pay cut to be a framer. It's just like you're right back to square one. And we are more fortunate than most people because our machines are able to sit a lot because we're not doing job shop work. We're running very short production runs, or we're doing a lot of one-off stuff for all these different systems for different customers. But because our guys are so dialed on making the machines run, they sit a lot at the time. We don't have a lot to run. So we're able to pick up the slack and figure that out. But finding machinists is just impossible. I don't know how people do it without robots. I would go crazy. Like, oh my gosh. So that's always a struggle. And then capital equipment is a tough business to be in because even machine shops, sometimes when they're busy, but markets are uncertain, they're not investing in capital equipment. So there's these huge ups and downs of just gangbusters to just crickets for us. Like right now, everybody's interested in automation and we're just doing a ton of quotes, but everybody's hesitant. Everybody's not sure what they're going to do. And so we're sitting here kind of watching, our bank account get smaller and smaller and smaller as we're also investing that money into R&D for new products going, okay, when are these people going to buy robots? And then
I bet. Well, do you guys see a big swing with end of the year? I would imagine, people trying to use up that depreciation if they need it for tax purposes.
Absolutely. Yeah. October, November, December are our busiest months every single year. That's just how it works. People, especially, it's definitely tied to taxes, but I think it's also tied to they've been planning on doing things all year, and all of a sudden the year is coming to an end, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, I told myself I was going to make all this stuff happen this year, and it hasn't happened yet." And my biggest advice for any machine shop being in equipment sales is if you purchase in like August, September, not only are you going to get a better price on your equipment, our price is the same year round, but all the machine tool dealers are always having those discounts and advertisements and stuff like that. If you'll get your machines super fast, their service department won't be slammed, so it'll get installed really quickly. You'll get a better deal on it. Wait until the end of the year is always just a hustle. So yeah, absolutely, it's busy.
Awesome.
So
yeah, no, I think that the finding people is going to be a big industry-wide thing. I think that it definitely emphasizes how we all need to do whatever part, small or big, we can to encourage education in manufacturing and, changing the mindset around this whole like dark, gloomy, blue collar, thing that we've spun manufacturing into be the last 40 years, 50 years, whatever. We really got to change that because, I know, people who listen to this know I've said this a million times, but like when I went into school for machining, I had no idea what machining was, like
right.
at all, literally at all. I had seen a few movies where they had like, side things about manufacturing or machining, and that was it. And like, I was definitely a sucker for aerospace billet, 6061 parts. I see that for carp stuff and thought it was so cool. And then, you get into manufacturing, you're like, oh, so you just made it out of aluminum? Like, cool. Okay. Like, so I think that's a big problem. And I don't know how to solve it, but it's definitely heavy on my mind all the time.
Yeah, that's an interesting topic. We talk about that so frequently. I don't know whether I'm sick or whether it's a good thing, but I just have been addicted to everything manufacturing forever. I can't even talk about anything else. And so this employee thing comes up all the time. How do I help the schools? I sat on the advisory board for all the schools in Montana while I was the Haas guy. And we talked about this regularly. And the hardest thing is they can't get people into the seats to learn. And I think the reason for that is, like, I saw the, Caldwell outside of Boise here about a year ago had on their marquee, delivery drivers, $30 an hour. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know any machine shop hiring somebody who's just at a community college at $30 an hour. Like, how do we compete with this?
Right.
And so people are going to have to automate, or they're going to get left behind, because and I see the paradigm shift. And that's why I love this job so much, is because you take a customer who's completely skeptical about automation. They think that it's not going to work for their shop. We're the exception. This doesn't work for us. Gee, it would be great to be able to do that. And then you show them a plan as to how to get there, and you install the system. And the first time they come in and all of their parts are done overnight, even though they only had 30 of them, and they could have made those during the day, but instead they spent time setting up the robot right before they left, and they ran overnight. They come in just ecstatic. It's just ecstatic because they can now afford to pay their employees more, because they were looking for other employees, but rather than hire those employees, let's just pay these guys more. We'll have them learn how to program the robot. And that's, I think, the solution. I don't think we're going to find more people. I don't think this is going to get easier. I think that's because there's so many more jobs out there that never existed before. Right? People are doing all this online stuff, like data mining, when that wasn't around 40 years ago.
Right. Oh, yeah. Yeah, everybody wants to, or not everybody, but there's a lot of people who want to work from home, and there's a lot of work from home jobs in that. I see ads for like Apple customer service, and they're like, you can work at home and we'll give you a computer and we'll give you a phone and we'll pay you really well. It's like, oh, of course people are going to take that job. Why wouldn't they? I understand.
So I've got a question for you. Why are machine shops so hesitant to look at automation from a standpoint of, like, I look at CNC, and I talked to the old guys in the industry that sold equipment, and they dealt with the exact same thing with, well, it's still happening. It happened to me in Billings, that story I told you about. And why are they were so hesitant to move into CNC? Now we're at a point where everyone thinks that's ridiculous. People who wouldn't have, invested in CNCs at that time were just crazy. Like, you have to have a CNC to be competitive. But people don't feel that way about automation yet, even though it's the next thing coming.
Yeah, I think that, part of it is they don't think they have the time to dedicate to it, not realizing that they have to find the time to do it. I think it's the same reason that a lot of people they'll put up with a bad situation in fear that the next situation is going to be as bad or worse. They'll have a CAM system that they hate, but it's the devil they know. Or like they'll have, even with employees, like they'll have an employee that is truly toxic to their workflow and is terrible to be there, but you know what? They're productive, and it's better. Like, what if we don't find somebody to fill those shoes? What if the person we find is worse? And I think that it's a lot of speculation and a lot of risk mitigation that's gone too far, at least in my eyes. That's what I see from a lot of people. I think that our trade in general is so change averse that, like, I don't think it's directed at automation. I think that automation carries a lot of negative connotations from that whole, like, oh, it's stealing my job kind of thing too, which makes it even harder. But I don't think that it's automation that is the enemy. It's just change in general is the enemy for a lot of these people.
Change in general. That's a good point. I'm going to do everything I can to make it so easy for them that they just don't have a choice. And it's going to take time. I think we're going to see, we already have, tremendous amount of changes over the next 2 years in this industry. All these black box systems where you can't modify them are going to disappear. We're going to look at them like popcorn ceiling, I think. and
Oh yeah.
people will embrace and be able to have their do automation themselves. There just won't be a choice. It's
Yeah. Well, I think you're going to see a lot of that dying out anyway, because there's so many shops that are dying out anyway. Like there are so many people who are looking towards retirement or not wanting to run the shop that they've run for 50 years anymore. Like there's so many small businesses in America that are closing because they don't have kids to give it to. They don't have, whatever, that I think you're going to see that kind of mindset die out anyway. Like, I mean, I've known that my shop is going to be automating eventually from day one, pretty much. Like that writing was on the wall 8 years ago. And it's going to take me a little bit to get there monetarily and process wise, but it was never like I'm scared of this. It's like, no, we got to get there. Like that's the only way we can do this.
Yeah, that's a good point. And maybe that's where it'll go, is that these old shops won't be buying automation. It'll just be all the new shops that buy automation, which is, I would say, a lot of our customers. We do have a couple of old guys. We did an install, and I apologize, Andy. I just called you an old guy. You can harass me about that later. But there's a shop in St. Ignatius, Montana, and he makes gun sights. It's called Skinner Sights. One of our favorite customers, if I'm allowed to say that. He's super enthusiastic, super nice guy, and he's the first person to claim, I don't know anything about computers. He doesn't want to get a CAM system because he just doesn't want to try and learn it. And so he programs his parts by hand. And but he installed an automation system, and it's just like, wow, I just programmed a new part with this robot in 45 minutes. I think I can do it in 30 minutes next time, because that was my first one. And he's just like over the moon. But those people are rare. Most of our customers, these young guys, and they're even funnier, because when you sell them a robot and then you try to go visit them, you knock on the door and nobody answers. And you listen and you hear the machine running.
And they're not even there.
They're not even there. And you call them. They're like, oh, sorry, man, I'm out mountain biking. Everything's great. I don't need anything.
Yep. Yeah. So I attribute my want for automation to a Modern Machine Shop article I read very early in my career. I was still in school, and it was for Straight Line Components, I think the company's called, in Canada. And they talked about it being like a 3.5 man shop, because it was like the grandfather, the father, his son, and then his fresh son, who was like 10 years old. So that was the half man. And they would come in the morning and spend like 2.5, 3 hours reloading. I think they had like some giant pallet system for their horizontal, and they'd reload up all of the tombstones, hit go, and then go to lunch and go mountain biking, and the kid would go to school and all that stuff. And it was like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good life. Like I want to be able to do that kind of stuff and like have that kind of freedom.
That's awesome. I love that. That's another good automation system we're gonna tackle after we get complete parts finished. I'd like to focus on doing that on a horizontal. Horizontals are tricky because of gravity. With the Mitaco system I was talking about, you could obviously load a bunch of different parts, because you could open all the vices, load the parts. You could even put downforce on all the parts at once if you wanted to. But on a horizontal tombstone, you can't touch all sides of the robot and hold those parts in with all the vices closed. And we have some ideas to make that happen. But I think horizontals will be the next evolution of automation. We had a customer that is our best customer. They have about 16 robot systems from us, and they were running a 2-machine Makino FMS system. And they were paying employees to load these parts. And they were one of the early shops to figure out that labor is the most expensive part of a machine shop. And so they went to a bunch of small verticals with robots. But the next project that they're working on, of course, we've turned them into automation pros at this point. So they just call us for pieces of components here and there, but they're programming robots installing it themselves. They're gonna load their horizontal, and I'm excited to see where that goes.
Oh, cool.
So
before we get into the last two questions, where should people go if they want to start learning how to program URs? Like, what's a good resource place to start learning that stuff?
Yeah, good question. For starters, you can just type in Universal Robots e-learning, and they have a super fun training course that's almost like a video game. I mean, the very beginning, you drag the robot out of the box and you like drag the plug to the wall, and they walk through all that. That's a really basic, good foundational learning. As far as training goes specifically for machine shops, because robots have such a wide application for so many industries, I don't know how much we're going to see from the robot manufacturers on training specifically for our industry, because they have other bigger industries, frankly, to put that training towards. We are going to be coming out with training videos. I've been so swamped with marketing, and I'd like to talk about that next. And sales that I haven't been able to get there, but we definitely plan to provide that training for people as to how to actually put the robot program together themselves to handle all those little issues that I was mentioning before. Because that could be 100 videos. There's lots of little learning curves there. So keep an eye out on our website. We're going to make those happen. That'd be the best place. And to kind of transition, this is kind of a curveball, but something I want to ask you about, because you get to talk to so many people. What do machine shops do for marketing? I've had mixed results with different things. I have no marketing experience. Now coming to a smaller company, I'm in charge of all of that and just trying to teach myself.
I think I might be the wrong person to ask about that. Like, we have done, besides this podcast, basically no marketing. And like, the point of this podcast was never like, oh, let's market Protium. So I've talked to people who have spent tons on Instagram ads and Facebook ads and all that. It sounds like Instagram's probably a better place to put that money than Facebook. It sounds like Facebook kind of mismanages your ads. I know I've heard, like, personally, we've put money towards building up our LinkedIn, because I know that I've heard that LinkedIn ad spends are much more expensive per click, but you can target them to like very specific stuff. Like, you can say, only show my ad to project managers from these companies or whatever. And so like, when you get a click, like, yeah, it might be a very expensive click, but you know it's from somebody who you actually wanted to see your ad, and not like, Joanne in Ohio who doesn't know what a machine is. I honestly, I think that I'm struggling through that kind of stuff as well. And really, like, I'm at the point where I need to do a better job of building up my processes before I can even support any work that would come from a successful marketing campaign. But I think that probably just experiment around with it. You could find anybody who's listening to this, please reach out to Graham if you have any pointers, because I am definitely not good at this.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, cool. That's good feedback. I've hired a consultant to help with our marketing, and going down that whole route and optimizing our website for SEO is my current number one thought. I would like to figure out how to really build an organic advertising platform beyond paying for ads. We have done a little bit of Google ads for our Vice actuators. I also don't know how many machine shops buy based off advertisements. I think machine shops have a good time selling their products, advertising on social media, because they're targeting a different demographic than other machine shops. Of course, there's some exceptions to that, people selling into machine shops, but it's hard to, I think, put together an ad for someone explaining in 30 seconds why a robot's going to be beneficial to them.
Right. Well, I think I had Michael Gimbel on recently, and they do the spindle gripper automation stuff. He said he spent a bunch in his episode on Instagram ads, and it sounded like that worked for them.
Oh, okay.
Because I think that, we're talking about, it's the younger demographic that is automating. So it kind of makes sense to meet them where they are. I don't know, like, a lot of my peers are looking at Google ads. A lot of us have ad blockers anyway for, generic websites or YouTube or anything like that. And so, but Instagram, I think that a lot of people will spend a lot of time, especially in the Insta Machinist community, just kind of scrolling and seeing whatever new product is out there.
Okay, cool. I'll definitely give that a shot. What would you say your relationship is with your machine tool dealers? Do you have a machine tool sales guy that you trust? I feel like Montana and Idaho, I was very fortunate, but also isolated because there wasn't a lot of other people who could spend time there. They trusted me to be a voice for them. And that's why we had the largest market share of any machine tool dealer in the country. But I don't know if other customers feel that way in the country about their machine tool dealers. Do you think, I'm debating on whether that's the best route to go and currently my best theory.
I mean, I think that there are fantastic salesmen out there. I personally have only bought from people that I really like, and that if they brought me something, maybe it wouldn't be the best fit for me, but I would at least give it a fair shake. I wouldn't just be like, yeah, whatever. I've got a few machine tool salesmen in my region that I haven't bought machines from, and I won't buy machines from. And if they told me about some new fancy product, I'd be like, yeah, okay, whatever. Don't call me again. Thanks.
Right.
But the ones that I have bought machines from, for sure, if they were like, hey, we see this really cool product that might help you out, I would definitely at least look over the email or give them a shot or something like that.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. Well, with this recent change to our company and deciding to go nationwide, which is really effective, January 1st, we just started this. And we're going to be looking to sign on machine tool dealers around the country. So if any of the listeners have a particular dealer they like, I'm way more interested in knowing which machine tool dealers the listeners enjoy. Less which ones want to sign up to see who would be the best to chase down. That's interesting.
Totally. All right. Well, that brings me to the last two questions I ask every guest every week. First up, what did you research this week? Doesn't have to be machining related or manufacturing, just what's been popping up in your browser.
Yeah, good question. I'm a self-help book addict for all acts of life, manufacturing history. Currently going through all of the history of Ford, which there's so many good books on. I started off with the Arsenal of Democracy. So I have a bunch of Google searches on just more information on that after listening to that book. Edsel Ford was such a fascinating person, and just started the book. I'm embarrassed to not remember the name, The Whiz Kids, which was after Edsel died and his son, Henry Ford Jr., took over. He hired all of these people that were in charge of financing for the Air Force during World War II and came into his company. And the book talks about how they impacted the way every company in the United States currently manages their finances, and questions whether maybe that's the best way or not. But still, fact of matter is it happened. And so that's a big part of my history. Just listened to a book by Carol Dweck called Mindset. I think it's a good way to pick out employees. It basically is, she published this quiz that determines whether someone has a growth or a fixed mindset. And the book is mostly focused on just being aware of this and pointing out the fact that the IQ test was not developed to measure how smart somebody was. It was originally designed to test which people needed to learn through some other method than what the traditional schooling system was working for. And the person who developed that was so upset that it kind of started to be used for something else, right? And that people can change how smart they are, and having mindset just focused on that fact that the end goal of the thing you're trying to achieve should not be the thing that makes you feel successful. It should be the fact that you enjoy struggling through what you're going through because you know you're learning during that process. And that is the goal, is to be doing those things that push you and learning new things. That was fascinating. constantly keeping up with absolutely everything machine tool related for machine shops, every new little gadget, gizmo, what new robots are coming out, and making sure we're representing the best products for our customer.
Awesome.
So yeah.
The the struggle, enjoying the struggle. My business partner Brad and I call Type 2 fun. I can't remember what book or show we saw it on, but it's fun in retrospect. It's not fun in the moment, but looking back on it, you're like, I enjoyed that. Yeah, I learned that, and I dug that ditch, or whatever sucked at the time, but looking back on it was fun.
I love that. We use Type 2 fun all the time for backcountry skiing adventures and hunting. You never remember the trips that went smoothly, but the ones where you like almost froze to death in a snow cave, like you talk about for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Type 2 fun. That's great.
Type 2 fun. Yeah. All right. Last question. What are the things you're working on to be a better person, leader, employer, what have you? None of us are perfect. We're all working on stuff. What are you working on?
Yeah. What am I working on? I don't have a ton of management experience. So working on how to get employees excited about taking ownership for projects, I think, is something that I'm working on. And thankfully, my business partner handles most of this. And our employees, honestly, all of them really do this well themselves. But I know we're going to be, as we're growing, taking on new employees that might not have that same mindset, and educating myself on how to get people to understand that they might not have all the answers, and that I don't have all the answers either, but I encourage you to make mistakes and go and try this and just take ownership for the project, I think is what I've been currently working on.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a super important thing as a manager, to be able to communicate, is that like, I'm not perfect. I don't expect you to be perfect. Like, and that's what I was just talking to a friend, Justin, about that, like that I'm never going to be mad at a future employee for making a mistake. It's like, or even, doing something wrong. I want you to do your best. And then if you don't, something goes wrong, do your best to fix it. And like, just do your best for however long you're here. And then we're good. Like that's all I can expect, is you to try your best. And, past that, we'll figure it out. So yeah, I think that's super, super important, and a really tough thing to communicate from a place of power.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard to communicate, even though I feel that way. Getting them to feel that I actually feel that way, and that I'm not just telling them that, is the tricky part. Like, I want to celebrate your mistakes. That means you were pushing stuff, you were trying stuff, you weren't sure. That's great. I agree.
Oh yeah. Well, Graham, please let everyone know where they can find you online if they want to know more about Lights Out or any of the things you talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. Best place is our website. It's constantly going through changes. Working on updating that. So it'll be changing a lot over the next couple months. lightsoutmfg.com. And then check us out on YouTube, Lights Out Manufacturing, and Instagram in the same place.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for all your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Dylan. This is a pleasure.
My pleasure. And thanks to all the Patreon members who make the show possible. You let me send people like Graham mics and a headset so you guys get good audio. Thank you all for listening, and I will be back next week.